in our managed services division. So if you're not familiar with NRTC, we serve more than 1,500 broadband and rural utility members in 48 different states, and our solutions, help our members bring the advantages of evolving technology, back to rural America. So myself specifically, I work mainly within our software and cybersecurity product line. So, the nature of my job keeps me pretty well informed to discuss, the cybersecurity landscape and how it relates to, our new reality and our new workspaces, as most of us are now working from home. So, cybersecurity, like everything else in the world right now, it's a little bit weird. It's a little bit unusual, but I think that's what makes it worth talking about. So let's go ahead and dive right in. The very sudden and unexpected reality of many of us transitioning our staff, to a work from home environment, it's been a challenge, obviously, and I think we've all grown as companies. We've been making the best of it, but, most of us would probably be lying if we said everything has gone perfectly and according to plan. So the thing to remember is that, where we see challenge or pain or frustration, cyber criminals instead see opportunity because disruptive or, foreign situations can reduce morale, and they can certainly increase stress for employees. But, more than that, all of these distractions, can lead to poor decision-making, or at the very least, minimize the vigilance required when it comes to, things like avoiding suspicious links or other types of malicious content. I think that, we're all struggling in some way or another to balance our combined work and home responsibilities. But, more than that, a lot of us are still actually struggling, to still get up to speed, adapting to the new platforms and programs that we need, that allow us to work from home. So you combine all of this together, and what it does, it leads to potential security mistakes. And that is why the situation that we're in has attracted the attention of cybercrime. Malicious actors, they have always attempted to exploit fear, or confusion. That's the straw that stirs their drink. They look to capitalize on major events and other times of crisis, and then use that to their advantage. And the times that we live in now, it's pretty much their Super Bowl. Bitdefender telemetry, they show a 475% increase in malicious activity just since the beginning of March. And while that activity is up, it's the focus of this activity that's also changed. It's now shifted to kind of leverage our struggles against us as we adapt to the, buzzword alert, new normal, while we're also focusing on staying informed by getting the latest updates about what's going on in the world. So the way I look at it, preparation and information, simply put, is power. Regardless of what you've maybe heard in the past, knowing is actually more than half the battle. So today I want to cover what's going on in the world of cybersecurity, what you and your employees can be doing to minimize risk, and if you need it, how we might be able to help. So, like I mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic, it has created this shift to a remote workforce as we attempt to follow health guidelines and practice social distancing. But, due to the level of access given through remote connections, as well as your staff acclimating to a new situation, not to mention strained IT resources that are limiting security reviews, there has been a significant increase in attack activity, specifically social engineering and phishing attacks that look to catch us slipping. And, this curve, it's not going to flatten. We're just getting started. And I don't want to be too on the nose here, but, computer viruses, using broad terminology, they are called viruses for a reason. They are going to mutate, evolve, and become more dangerous over time. And so too will the attack techniques that are used to distributing them. So, gathering information on what's out there that helps you understand the risk. And the more you understand the risk, the more successful you're going to be when preventing and even responding to these attacks. So what I want to do first, just to give you guys some context, I want to share some information about what type of threats are commonly out in the wild today. So first up, there are plenty of ransomware variants to choose from, but I do want to talk about one specifically. It's called NetWalker, and NetWalker has been around since August of 2019. It's also been commonly referred to as mail-to ransomware, and that's because of the .mail-to extension that it will append to your files on your machine if it becomes infected. But regardless of what it's called, like most ransomware, it is extremely nasty, and it's found a dance partner with COVID-19 and everything else that's going on with that. And what I mean is that cyber criminals are now sending out COVID-19 related messaging and embedding this type of ransomware as an attachment to the emails that you receive. So if you're unlucky and you get tricked into downloading the file, it's going to run a script. Files are going to get saved to a temp folder. and then they're going to launch. And once it launches, it's going to encrypt all of your files, just like any other ransomware variant, and it'll leave you with this cute little note. So if you ever see this on your machine, you're about to have a very bad day. Because here's the thing, as of today, there are no known weaknesses with this particular variant that would allow you to decrypt the files without paying the ransom. To get your files back, you're going to have needed to create a recent backup. Otherwise, you're going to have to recreate all of those affected files from scratch. Or, it can be even worse. If I have any electric companies on the call, you should look up what just happened to NRTC de Portugal. Pardon my American pronunciation, but they are a Portuguese electric company in 19 different companies with over 11 million customers. And what happened is they got hit by a similar variant like this, and 10 terabytes of data was stolen, and a ransom was placed on that data at nearly $11 million in Bitcoin. And what's interesting is that this ransom isn't just about getting those files back either. They're using, kind of a rude tactic, in my opinion. They're threatening to leak this data and sell it on the dark web if the ransom isn't paid. So not only are the attacks evolving, but the ransom demands and things like it are beginning to evolve as well. So some quick, obvious but important tips that I want to touch on. Number one, let's make sure we're only opening attachments or clicking on links that you trust. But be careful. Even if it looks like it's from somebody it is extremely easy and common to spoof email addresses. Take a look here. Notice the highlighted part at the top. This is a recent test that we ran on our employees. And as you can see, it's really not hard at all to make it look like it's coming from anybody, even human resources. So trust your instincts. If it seems suspicious that this person is contacting you or requesting something from you, don't open it, don't engage. But if curiosity does get the best of you, because I get it, we're all bored right now, reach out to that person specifically and verify if it's a legitimate message or request. The next thing here, I do recommend that you turn off the option to automatically download attachments. Doing this can save you from trouble, and it ensures that you're not going to download something to your machine without realizing it. And also, these types of situations, that's why endpoint protection is so necessary. It's the proactive real-time element of these programs. Those are the things that can save you by detecting that malicious file or the process or the script before it can cause damage by blocking it before it gets started. Last thing here, backups. You have to have them just in case of a worst case scenario. No security program is 100% guaranteed. So you need to make sure to expect the unexpected. Make sure that you're backing up all of your important files on a regular basis. But more than that, make sure that you're testing your backups to know that if you were to lose files, would restoring them have everything you need? This is going to help you turn the potential of a really bad day into just a minor inconvenience. It's still going to be a headache for you or your IT team, but wiping your machine and restoring all of your files, that's a whole lot better than losing everything and having to start from scratch. So moving on, the next thing, like I mentioned, it is not just that there's been a new surge in cyber attacks, it's that there's a new coat of paint for established threats like phishing and social engineering. And these attacks are going to appear in all kinds of different ways. So an extremely relevant example is how they are attempting to capitalize on the economic impact payments that are being distributed nationwide here in the United States. So phishing is the #1 attack vector in all of cybercrime because it works. So it's more important now than ever, to be vigilant and skeptical of any information request that comes your way. And it's easy to lose your head right now, especially, the economy has made it tough on some people. But most of us have received, our 4-figure check from the government. But hey, wouldn't it be great if I could double that money for you? Or what if you haven't received it, but I can be the one to get it to you tomorrow? Or maybe your unique situation qualifies you to receive more than one of these checks. All you have to do, click this link, sign up, send me some personal information, maybe a routing number or two. So if it sounds too good to be true, that's because it is. So a few things here. #1, be wary of anything that emphasizes it as a stimulus check or a stimulus payment. The official term, economic impact payment. Anything that refers to it as anything other than that can be ignored. But also, do not pay any money for this. A real government agency will not request any processing fees or a deposit to receive a check of this nature. And you're also never going to be able to get this type of payment faster by allowing somebody to work on your behalf. But if all else fails and you're really convinced that it's real, let's at least do our research. Check if the agency that they claim to represent even exists, and then contact that organization to verify the legitimacy of that request. But as a note here, make sure that we're not using any contact information that's provided in the email. Look up the agency online, find the official contact information. But more than that, you still have to be careful because threat actors, they have been known to create fake websites to pair with their emails to make themselves appear legitimate. So be on high alert, double source, and double check all of this type of information. Last thing here, the government will never communicate with you directly through social media. They're not going to send you a Facebook message. They're not going to slide into your DMs on Instagram or Twitter, because scammers will often impersonate real people or entities on social media. So be suspicious of messages of this nature from folks, even if everything appears to check out. And again, I want to say it again, if it's somebody that you do know, reach out to them directly, get them on the phone, verify the legitimacy of that message. So again, as I mentioned at the top, cyber criminals do latch on to hot button news items, but generally when they do this, they're trying to spread misinformation. They're going to sensationalize the news to generate their own special type of clickbait. But something interesting about the current landscape is that these guys have now been spreading accurate information in their efforts to infect machines with malicious software. So for example, this is a Johns Hopkins interactive dashboard of COVID-19 infections. This image is from a while ago, so sadly you'll notice it's out of date, but this dashboard and things like it have been repurposed by cybercrime in a number of different ways. It looks great, it's legitimate, and it's accurate, and it actually is quite useful to understand what's going on in the world. But what's happening is that cybercrime is taking this real data and they are deploying and embedding it into malicious sites or even emails to spread password stealing malware. I've even seen it start to be packaged into for sale malware deployment kits for less than $500. So the cost barrier of entry, extremely low. But because it's in these deployment kits, the technical barrier is also extremely low. So this and other things like it are going to be widely used for the foreseeable future. And the thinking here is that by providing accurate and real-time information, not only will a user download and infect their own machines, but they're going to spread it. They're going to forward it to their friends, their family, and the coworkers that they have. And that's how it's going to continue its spread. So for this very general rule, very short, this is not just a cybersecurity rule, but for everything, don't get your information just from Facebook or from whatever comes through your email inbox. To get the latest news, do the work, go to trusted, verifiable sources, and I've listed a few of those links on the screen here. So what can we do? There are no silver bullets. It's not like there's one thing that you can do or one product that you can buy that's going to protect you 100%. Instead, it's about doing as many things as you can, and each of those things incrementally will add up to provide additional security to protect your employees and your internal infrastructure. So I'd like to transition to talking about a few things to consider, but I do want to stress these examples, they are not a one-size-fits-all. Okay, you are not doing a bad job if you're not doing everything I'm about to talk about. Instead, I want you to look at this section as a jumping off point, a brainstorm, a reference list for you to consider as you evaluate the specific risks and needs of your organization. So firstly, I want to talk about what you can be doing as a business. So first up, I want to talk about limiting user rights. So limiting user rights, what it's about really is preventing widespread damage. If one machine gets compromised, it's important that we limit the attacker's ability to escalate privileges on that device, because if an attacker gains access to that device on a remote solution, be it a VPN or otherwise, the first thing they're going to do is attempt to gather credentials from that device and then move laterally to other devices in the attempt to pivot around your network to gain access to the critical systems and sensitive information that you have. So another thing to consider with this is when it comes to user rights, you may have certificates today that validate that a particular device is managed by your organization. So it's worth considering if and how that's protected. If an attacker gains access to a user's endpoint, make sure that those certificates cannot be exported and repurposed by the attacker. So a quick final note on user rights is that unmanaged devices should be provided limited access, limited access to data and resources. So an example of this would be the Microsoft Office 365 conditional access policy that restricts unmanaged devices from accessing files or emails. So now that we've limited our user rights for our normal employees, the next step is to make sure that we're securing our privileged accounts. Privileged users, so a domain admin, for example, those accounts can do serious damage in the wrong hands. So tying this back to our first bullet point, look into downgrading any accounts where you can. Accounts with unnecessary privileges, That's a common problem for many networks and many companies, and cyber criminals, they count on this to make their life easier. The more privileged users you have and the higher their access, the higher risk you run compromising your entire network just because of one mistake. So if you haven't already, now is the time to start auditing those type of accounts. And for that same reason, it's also important to make sure that we are not sharing these accounts. Each privileged user should have their own separate account with their own unique password and specific access tailored to what they actually need. So moving on, if you're not already, now is the time to enable multi-factor authentication everywhere that you can. So at the very least, look to implement multi-factor on external corporate resources to reduce network and application access. Multi-factor is one of the best ways to verify a user's true identity and prevent unauthorized access to critical systems and data, because you guys know as well as I do, password practices used by our employees, oftentimes they are less than ideal. So what multi-factor does, it makes sure that we're not entrusting the security of our devices and accounts just to passwords on their own. And the cool thing about multi-factor is that there's many different ways to implement it, and you can investigate what's going to work best for your company. But remember this, good security that isn't used isn't very secure. So you're going to want to weigh the importance of which extra factor is going to be the easiest for your employees to actually implement. So finding the right balance can be unique depending on the size and type of company that you have. So I don't want to recommend anything universal, but I will say this, biometric authentication is extremely hard to fake. So whatever path you choose, multi-factor is a good first step to securing your assets from cyber criminals. The next list here is, I think it's important to have a renewed focus on endpoint and cloud visibility. Many companies, may have lost visibility into any malicious activity that targets your remote workers. So to combat this, you may want to consider deploying multi-layer endpoint agents on your employee machine. So ideally, this agent will be able to protect, detect, and even respond to malicious activity, but having even one of these layers in place is certainly better than not having anything at all. And beyond just the endpoint, cloud services are an important resource for our remote workers, but a lot of times these do contain sensitive corporate data and other types of information. So let's make sure we are receiving logs from our cloud providers and that you or they are regularly reviewing these logs for unauthorized access. And to even go the next step to further limit risk, your configuration should be assessed and other security controls reviewed on a more frequent basis for the duration of our work from home experience, however long that does end up being. Next up, this is a big one. This is always one of my top recommendations. I think looking into provide specific training for remote employees is very important. So for a lot of these employees, this is a very different environment from working in the office. So while it is beneficial to educate how to detect and report phishing attacks or even practicing good password hygiene, I would also recommend training on other security measures that relate specifically to your business. Again, this isn't going to be universal to everybody, but a few common examples, would be to train on things like best practices when working with confidential material or how to secure your physical device assets while working from home. So the sky is the limit on this one. The more training, the better, but your company should be able to understand what types of training is most important for your specific business needs. So our new remote workforce, it also means an increased need for source IP visibility. Depending on your network, identifying the originating IP address for traffic, it may be hindered for any number of different reasons. And now that all of our workers are hopefully using VPNs, we need to try to make sure that that traffic, that we can identify where that traffic originates from, and then we can tie that to a source IP address. We'd also like to make sure that, we're making sure that the assigning of IP addresses can be determined and linked to specific accounts. It's going to be extremely helpful to link that suspicious traffic or an action to the IP address that it originates from as soon as possible, which helps us assist with quick incident response and any other necessary recovery. So the last thing on this slide, I would recommend disabling any password reset functions for your remote workers. If an attacker compromises a machine, they now have access to that system, meaning they most likely now have access to the recovery email address. Many password reset protocols, they're going to send links or a code to that email to validate an identity. So because of that, for now, I would require that all password requests, go to an administrator to review, validate, and even perform. So, these are just some things to consider as a company, but when it comes to mitigating risk, your employees are also an important cog in the wheel of cybersecurity. I want to stress the #1 risk factor in cybersecurity, it's human error. So if I'm being honest, you, the person who is listening to this, you are the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain. So let's talk a little bit about what we can be doing as an employee, as we all acclimate to the work from home environment. So #1, very important. That's why I put it first. Let's use our VPNs. VPNs give anyone working from home extra protection from cyber criminals. It's going to create a secure connection with your company's network and then encrypt that traffic that's sent between the 2 points. So it's important for a lot of reasons, has a lot of different uses, but it's especially important to use VPNs when you're working on or accessing company information. Make sure that you are connected securely and using the VPN during work hours, but especially so when you're working on confidential documents, viewing personal information, or any other type of sensitive corporate data. So we talked about this part a lot today, but it's worth mentioning again. Be wary of social engineering. These types of attacks are popping up by the thousands, and they're going to take many different forms. So here are a few things to be on the lookout for. #1, malicious attachments. They often come in the form of PDF files or Microsoft Office macros. It's no longer a thing where they just show up as sketchy executable files anymore. So we need to be mindful and alert of any attachment that comes our way. But more than that, here's another thing. Double check the email address of the sender, especially if the domain that it's coming from. I touched earlier on how easy it is to spoof an address. So this part's not foolproof, but many times malicious emails will be slightly different or misspelled in an attempt to fool users. But some other things to look out for, messages that are extremely generic. Many of these emails are going to be mass distributed. So while some may go the extra mile and be personalized, many of them won't. So any generic email you receive should automatically raise suspicion. And more than that, cyber criminals, they want you to make snap judgments, whether you're replying to the email or clicking on a link. So they're going to try and force the issue with some type of urgent messaging. You may also find things like a last-minute change request to establish communication. So maybe they'll ask you to use a new phone number or email address. But I think the last thing here is just be cautious of anybody that only wants to communicate via email. So if they refuse to take a phone call, or if they refuse to join an online video software platform to communicate, that should be a pretty big red flag. So the final tip here is to make sure that we're validating that any URLs or hyperlinks in the email are associated with the business they claim to be from. A lot of times these links, they're going to contain slight misspellings, or they'll look to obfuscate the true destination in a number of different ways to trick you into thinking it's a valid link. So if an email displays any of the previous red flags, or even if it doesn't, always make sure we're double checking any links in an email. It should be one of the first things that we're doing. One best practice that I recommend, right click on a link, select copy link, and paste it into a notepad or Word document for review. This is going to help you prevent being fooled. You'll be able to see if that shortened or spoofed URL is legitimate, and you'll be able to see the true destination. So kind of moving back to the slide here, I do want to touch on, keeping our personal and professional life separate. Do not share your work devices with friends, family members, especially your children. I know that kids are home right now. It's a lot to deal with. So you may let them play on an iPad to keep them entertained, but let's make sure that they're keeping their hands off of our work devices. And it's also important for us to separate our work devices from our personal ones. This is going to help reduce the risk of unauthorized, but also inadvertent access to protected company information. So if your company has enabled MFA, use it, especially with any corporate applications or a VPN. I think, the interesting thing today is that most people that use multi-factor, these are people that are already security minded. They understand the threats out there. So it's important for the rest of us, especially those who maybe don't follow good password or security practices, to have this in place. Unfortunately, I have found that it's true that a lot of the people who need it don't use it, and those that do use it, they don't need it as often. So let's try and flip the script. If you've never used it, or if you think it's too confusing or it's uncomfortable, this is a great time for growth and to try and go out and learn something new. Last thing, also general advice, even if you're not working from home, let's make sure that we have company suggested security software installed on our machines. So we talked earlier about the importance of backups, but endpoint protection and password management tools are easy ways to make sure both your devices and your online data are staying secure. And then beyond that, make sure that we're staying current, not just on our security software, but all software and system updates and patches. So if your administrator pushes an operating system update out to you, make sure that you're installing that as soon as possible. So we're wrapping things up, and I promise to be very, very quick on this slide, but I just want to let you guys know some of the things that we have available that have helped out our members. So first, our Nova Secure Cybersecurity Suite has many other benefits, but the two things I'll touch on are things like security policy reviews and our security staff training through our partnership with KnowBe4. We also partner with Dynetics. They are an applied sciences company out of Alabama. They provide detailed and rigorous network assessment and testing. And we also have their Net Alert service available, which is going to package together a monitored SIM and endpoint detection response system that is monitored in real time 24/7 by certified security experts. And then lastly, we have our TechShield cybersecurity software suite for both residential and enterprise use. So TechShield, it includes endpoint security, password management, cloud backup software, as well as packages that include identity protection, including guaranteed restoration services. So, that's the end of our scheduled discussion today. I wanted to keep it short and sweet, but we do still have a few minutes here at the end to open it up for questions. So, please chat those in. We'll get to as many of those as we can before I have to cut you guys loose. And while we're waiting for those, I did want to leave some contact information on the screen. So if you have any questions that you'd rather discuss one-on-one rather than as part of the group, or if you have any feedback, positive or negative, please feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. And I've also posted an email distro for our broader managed services division. So if you want to reach out and learn more about what we do or how we might be able to help, there you go. So already, I'm going to dig through the questions and we'll start answering some.